Good morning, everyone. We'll begin momentarily. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Blaise Mishtal, Vice President for Policy here at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. And I'm delighted to welcome and be joined by a longtime friend of JINSA, Representative Claudia Tenney of New York. We'll have a conversation about the Middle East. Congresswoman Tenney has been an outspoken voice in Congress about the Iranian regime's dangerous nuclear ambitions and all of its dangerous activities. Congresswoman Tenney has been vocal in her belief that Iran's nuclear program is not just a regional issue, but also an imminent and direct threat to the United States and the world. We're interested to hear from you, Congresswoman, on your take about the whirlwind of activity on the Iranian front, the negotiations that have been going on. Given your sizable expertise on the topic and your role on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. We're also curious to hear about President Trump's recent trip to the region and developments in Syria. So with about 30 minutes, let me dive right in and ask you first about the status of negotiations. We heard this week that President Trump and the negotiating team sent Iran an outline of a proposal. We heard from the Supreme Leader of Iran basically rejecting that proposal earlier this week. What is your take on the status of negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program? Are we at an impasse? Are we likely to get a deal? How do you assess the situation?
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for having me on. And I apologize for a delay and that we had to postpone, and here we are today. But look, this is has been a sort of a rocky road for people who are as adamant about making sure Iran never has access to a nuclear weapon, as I am and many others. And we've seen some fits and starts, I would say, out of the administration. Maybe they're just negotiating situation, but we wanted to make clear, and obviously I have made very clear to the administration. I wrote a letter with 9 other members, I think 8 other members, and then I also joined, demanding and making sure that the administration understood clearly that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. We can't go back to JCPOA 2.0. And then recently, the RSC, the Republican Study Committee, I think over 200 members on our Republican Study Committee, which is the largest caucus in the entire Congress, also sent a letter to the administration echoing those concerns and making sure that this is very clear to the administration, and understanding that we will not accept any kind of agreement that would come back ultimately that would give any kind of possibility or access for Iran. Obviously, they're frustrated. They want to continue enriching. They've never stopped, as we know. And so this is a huge problem. They never comply. They always lie. And we have got to be on top of that issue. And they're a huge problem. Under the Biden administration, we witnessed relief from sanctions. They were able to sell oil. And then by selling oil, they were able to continue their proxies, which led directly to October 7th, or indirectly, you might say, through proxies. We had some, weak attempts by Iran actually to attempt to bomb Israel, which we saw was not a great display of their defense. But look, this is a continued problem, whether it's the Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and also the Houthis operating more effectively than we thought out of Yemen, and actually coming and getting armed and continuing to get armed. And that's a direct result of lifting sanctions on Iran.
What is your sense, Congressman, of sort of the further timeline for negotiations? We know that President Trump, in the letter that he first sent to Supreme Leader Khamenei, sort of included a 2-month deadline. I guess we don't officially know when that started or when that runs out, but if we go based on sort of when negotiations started, the first negotiation was April 11th. So 2 months from that is coming up quickly. So what's your sense for the timeline or when we can say that negotiations have failed to reach a deal?
Yeah, it's, I think this timeline might be short. I mean, there's a lot going on in Washington, as you may have heard. So there's a timeline for many things. The one big beautiful bill is supposed to get signed by July 4th. We have a number of issues happening around the world. You're seeing, difficulties with the talks on no seemingly end in sight to the Russia-Ukraine war. And now this situation, which I think is critically important and dangerous as we continue to watch the erosion of Western civilization all around the United States. And I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I was talking to a friend of mine last night. Um, because of social media, 24-hour access to all kinds of decentralized media and people getting access to information and information that can't be verified and information that's propaganda, especially when you look at, some of the platforms like TikTok and so many other social media outlets that people are using by the billions. I worry that we're in among the worst situation that we've been in, even when you look at World War II and, look, Nazi Germany, did not have access to social media, did not have access to the types of money and infiltration into our communities, our college campuses that we're seeing with this anti-Semitic, anti-Western sentiment. And I think it's noteworthy that it's not just an anti-Semitic sentiment; it's an anti-Western sentiment. And I find it very interesting that it's even in upstate New York where we have a very small Jewish population, but we have a lot of small colleges. Cornell University is not in my district, but it's nearby, and that was where right after the October 7th attack, we saw a professor, among a group of students, say that the Hamas attack was exhilarating and inspiring, and and this being tolerated. And actually, I wrote a letter to the president at the time, Martha Pollack, condemning this and demanding that this professor be immediately removed because this was not protected under free speech. And he did get temporarily, sidelined, but now he's back teaching at Cornell. But this is something that also another college nearby, Hobart William Smith, which is actually in my district. We had a former Columbia professor who had allegedly at least pledged allegiance to Hamas, or it may have had actual ties to Hamas, coming in, and they were welcoming him to do a speech. And we stood up on that, and we actually got that speech canceled because it was really directed at Jewish people, Jewish students. It was something that was, again, not protected under our definition of what the First Amendment protects. It was insightful. It was hatred. It would never be tolerated if it was targeted against any other group. So I think a lot of it is, I think you can't really separate the anti-Semitism and the anti-Western sentiment. And I think it's concerning. I mean, we just saw all the graduation speeches that just came up. So when you see that countries like Iran that are malignant are trying to, their maligned influences is, the money they have from selling their oil, the look away from countries like China that don't seem to care as long. It's all about money, and the ability to infiltrate all across communities in rural upstate New York and all over, to me sends a greater problem. We have to start really being much more aggressive. We have to stand up and talk about and clarify what our values are, and that this isn't just anti-Semitism. I mean, there's very small Jewish population in my communities, and probably very small Jewish population in most of these colleges, and yet there's this huge anti-Semitism going on, which again, I can't emphasize enough. I think it's anti-Western. I think there's a certain Marxism strain in glorifying Hamas and not really understanding the truth. And then, of course, you've seen the famous interviews where students can't even really articulate which river, which sea, what they really stand for. But it's almost an anarchy versus a society that is based on self-governance and freedom.
I want to come back to that because I know that you do have stand up very strongly against disinformation, and that is a major challenge that we face right now. But I wanted to stick on the Iran deal just a
Great.
moment longer, Congresswoman. In the letter that you signed, that you had mentioned that you sent to the president, the RSC sort of stood by the president's statement that Iran's enrichment capability had to be totally dismantled, that the line for a good deal had to be no enrichment. The proposal we've seen or has been reported from the president this week would allow Iran to continue enriching at some lower level for some indefinite time into the future, and then proposes a international consortium to allow Iran to access nuclear fuel. Do you have an opinion on whether that meets the criteria for a good deal that was set forth in your letter?
Yeah, I strongly disagree with that. It's again, as I said in the beginning, it's fits and starts. I hear the administration being very clear, and then something like this comes out, and then we all stand up and say this is unacceptable, and then you see a True Social post or something coming out that this is not going to happen. You see Marco Rubio testifying in front of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, very adamantly saying that this is not going to happen. That we're going to require INARA to be initiated, so that would have to come back to a vote again. But I really do worry that I don't want to be too concerned about some of the media that comes out, but I don't want to not be vigilant on this, because it really does worry me that we're getting sort of mixed signals on this, and the worry that the president is. And I don't think he would do this, but it's someone in the administration or people that are just trying to get to a deal don't realize the gravity of this deal. We cannot have the enrichment. It's just a non-starter, and that to even suggest it in any negotiation sends a really bad signal to Iran, our allies, and our enemies, quite frankly, saying, "Oh, look, they're going to get enrichment." It would tip the balance of power in the world to such a degree that I don't know if we could return from it. And that's what worries me. And I want to make sure the president's team understands how serious this is and how serious the situation is in the Middle East. And I think, we will see ultimately, as the negotiations move on. I'd love to see some people that are real hawks on Iran not getting a nuclear weapon in the room. And I'm assuming there are some there. I do appreciate the really good work that Secretary Pompeo did on the maximum pressure campaign, and his work on that issue, and being completely stalwart in the first Trump administration. So I know that he's been messaging quite a bit on it, as have other people that were involved directly in this negotiation. And I just hope that they take the counsel of these people that really have been in the room, have seen the past, and have seen the mistakes that were made by the Obama administration. And then, we can't go back to that situation again. And I get there's the art of the deal, but at this point, I really worry about the signals going to, our allies and enemies, especially.
Speaking of signals, another signal that the president and his administration have been sending has been to Israel lately. It's been reported, telling them not to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. But with time running out and a deal not evident, do you have a sense of what happens or what should happen if there is no deal? How do we deal with Iran's nuclear program then?
Yeah, I don't think we can ever give up on making sure that we do not allow the enrichment. And I certainly they're going to continue to negotiate, but I think a lot of people were concerned, and I noted, and many of us very pro-Israel folks noticed that the president did a grand trip to the non-democratic authoritarian regimes, and it was quite grand and beautiful with purple and red carpets and everything, and did not visit Israel on that trip. I think that he was trying to find a way, which was the unusual way of creating the Abraham Accords. No one ever thought we could do the Abraham Accords. We had to negotiate directly with, the Palestinians and resolve that issue before we could ever get anybody else. But I think what he was trying to do is get everyone to understand that we all need to be part of the solution, and we need to all be part of the prosperity of the future of the Middle East. And I think that could have been misinterpreted as he wasn't supporting Israel, but I don't think that's the case. I think he's a very strong supporter of Israel, as we are. And but I do think that Israel has to protect itself, and I think the United States has to be 100% supportive. And we're going to continue on every level to advocate for Israel, to advocate for the constant replenishment of Iron Dome and many of the tools that Israel needs to protect itself. And I don't think the administration is backing off on that. And although there are some who have interpreted that with mixed signals.
If Israel does decide that it needs to act against Iran's nuclear program to defend itself, do you think the United States should participate or help support it in doing so?
It seems to me that the United States would support it. I don't know if we'd actually directly engage in that, as there's been a discussion on this. And some of these things I just popping in my head that we discussed in the Intelligence Committee. So I'm going to veer away from that for the moment.
Fair enough.
Okay.
In that case, maybe pivoting to issues of disinformation and propaganda that you raised, in addition to the very troubling things that we've seen on America's college campuses. In just the last week, we've seen how even Iranian and Hamas propaganda make their way into mainstream media. There was reporting in the Washington Post and other major outlets that Israel had fired on and killed scores of people at aid distribution sites. Propaganda that was put out by Hamas and later shown to be false. Do you have any idea of how we deal with that, how we deal with this potent propaganda weapon that Iran and its proxies have and deploy against our partners and us?
Yeah, that was particularly disturbing. And I will tell you what was so upsetting for me. I watched this on live Twitter and through social media as major media outlets like the New York Times and others continue to perpetuate the false statement and the lies about this situation. And what really bothered me more than anything is that we can expect that from the New York Times. We know that they've been a propaganda wing for the left for a long time. We know that they were even supportive of Nazi Germany back in the day, and we know that they are not a reliable news source. I can tell you firsthand that they have smeared and libeled me numerous times. So I'm not, I don't know if people actually totally respect their opinion, at least on our side. But I will tell you what really bothered me more than anything, and I finally made a phone call. I am a subscriber to Spectrum News, which is the local news station in upstate New York, that the cable station that handles the news, and they kept showing the propaganda on their own news site that the IDF fired on humanitarian distribution sites, and I finally called and emailed the Spectrum News in my region and said, "Do you know that this has all been proven wrong and it's propaganda and it's Hamas and an enemy of the United States?" And I stopped seeing the report, but I never saw a correction, and they may have corrected it. I just never saw it. So we have got to have people unafraid to stand up and do these things. I mean, I was an owner of a newspaper. I'm also a lawyer. It's one of the reasons I explain every vote that I take, and that I know that what happens often in media, especially when you see traditional news sources, whether it's cable news networks or TV, a lot of young people aren't even looking at TV. It tends to be older people. We have to get to these people on social media and other ways and try to set the record straight all the time. We have a section that I usually do more during my campaign year, which would be next year, called Fact versus Fiction. And we put out a lot of the false claims and then tell the truth. We do it side by side. But I think that's something that would be a really good issue for pro-Israel and maybe in Jinsan, your wide array of supporters and people in your network, to really just start doing that. Show fact versus fiction, so people aren't constantly predisposed to the false information that they're getting. And that's what really bothered me most than anything. As a newspaper reporter, I had to try to, and actually owner as a publisher, we had to always decide every week, what am I going to put in this paper? I carried libel insurance. I had a couple $1 million in libel insurance in case we ran a letter to the editor, or we had one of our editors or one of our columnists put something in that wasn't accurate. And so I think that becomes very hard to do when you have, again, this decentralized media where you have this flood of propaganda coming through. But what bothered me more is these, this Spectrum News and others running it over and over. I called my staff and said, it's driving me crazy. And I finally called. But I think that we have to be vigilant. I don't think they're going to police themselves. And I got to be honest with you, those people don't get paid a lot, and they just run stories that get sent to them. They pick them up off news wires that aren't careful. And I think that's, we just have to constantly be on top of those things.
Well, thank you very much for taking the stand that you have taken and for trying to correct the record where you can. On the topic of propaganda, and disinformation, let me ask you about another problematic source of propaganda in the region, which is Qatar, which we know for years has run Al Jazeera, which has issued calls for the killing of Americans, let alone Israelis and Jews, and yet, as we've seen in the negotiations in the Gaza war and with President Trump's recent trip that included a stop in Doha, continues to be treated as a U.S. partner. What's your view on Qatar and sort of the costs and benefits of our relationship with them?
Yeah, it is a very complicated relationship. Obviously, we have a base there, and it's our largest base in the Middle East, and outside of a forward base that we have in that region. The problem is, you've got Qatar, and I think Al Jazeera is particularly. I will tell you, I was recently overseas, and one of the only stations I could get was Al Jazeera. So I said, I'm going to watch this and see if it's worse than CNN. Well, there is something worse than CNN. It's Al Jazeera, if you're a pro-Israel person. And I will tell you, it's a problem, and we have to have the president be more forceful with Qatar. They're very charming. They have a lot of money. And they try to play both sides. They work with helping us with hostage negotiations. They helped, me and my community with a constituent that was in a prison in Afghanistan for almost 2 years, and they negotiated and helped us get him out. With the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan under Joe Biden, the Doha and Qatar Airways was instrumental in getting a lot of people out of there and through to Doha and eventually back to the United States. So they fill in every gap where they can get positive press and positive ways to sort of smother the negatives that they're doing, and they're spreading of propaganda. They're billions of dollars into universities, and their money that goes all over. And we have relationships with them, with their ambassador, with their other officials that are here in the United States. And I try to hold them to task. Whenever I see a story, I send it over and say, explain this. Now, the last story that I sent over, which was unacceptable and I think was propaganda coming out of Al Jazeera, I've never received a response. So Qatar has to, and the president has to do this, in spite of the grand, visit to the authoritarian, non-democratic, kingdoms with human rights violations like Qatar and the countries that the president visited. We have a huge problem brewing in the Middle East. We can do high-level meetings like that look very grandiose, but at the same time, there are thousands of people within those countries that feel exactly the same way that people in Gaza do. They've been propagandized. They have no rights. They have no, they only know what the government tells them. And this is a problem throughout the Middle East. And I think that we have to have the president, now that he's done the big trip, he needs to go through and start holding these countries accountable, including Qatar and all of them. And I know that Saudi Arabia has made attempts to, they have Mecca and Medina, and obviously within their borders, but I know that there has been an effort to actually, provide more rights to women because of the leadership of Princess Rima, the ambassador, which has, been, very hard for these, very, very, strict Sharia type law countries. They're trying to open up Saudi Arabia more, but, it's a very small step in a multi-thousand-mile journey. So I think there's a lot that we have to start doing, and we have to start holding them accountable and saying, look, you need to start looking at human rights. You need to stop funding terrorism. You need to stop creating the unrest that we see. And I get it. There's small countries with Iran looming right across the Arabian Sea. That is, this is a complicated issue. And, that's their concern. And I think, but let's go back to the first question and the most important thing. I think one thing we can all agree on, if we have a non-nuclear Iran that somehow goes back to having freedom and eliminating or allowing the people to take this regime out of play so that we stop this state sponsor of terror, we stop the disruption in the Middle East that is caused by them, I think you're going to have a better chance of bringing some of these smaller, wealthy, authoritarian countries like Qatar, UAE, and others to the table so that we can have more peace in the Middle East ultimately. But this is a very fragile situation.
It certainly is. And not to burden you with one more complicated question in the minute that we have left, but I did want to ask you about Syria and your views of the new regime there. Obviously, tremendous potential with Assad gone, but troubling past for al-Shara, given his role as a jihadist in the past. Do you see more promise or peril in the new Syrian regime, and how do you think we should work with them, if at
Yeah, I am very concerned about the Syrian situation. I know people are saying, oh, well, at least we don't have Assad. Nothing could be worse. But I do worry that we've put an al-Qaeda leader in place who has around him other jihadists in his cabinet and the people that are surrounding him. So I think we have to proceed very cautiously on Syria. I know a lot of Syrian nationals here are very concerned about it. I was a little worried about the president lifting the sanctions on Syria. So far, it looks like he's been putting the pressure on them, but I'd like to see the reforms in Syria that need to happen. And let's see if this person who is, indoctrinated with extremism and jihadism and Islamism and actually has an interest in creating an Islamic government there. I mean, that worries me right off the bat. Where are we going with this? So that's a caution. That's just a cautionary tale in Syria. And so I mean, I'm very reluctant. I know many American, even members of Congress, even some Republicans have embraced this as, oh, we finally got rid of Assad. This is going to be great. I just am very concerned about what we do there. And I also worry just on a long term that, the United States, has to stand up and get involved with some of these countries and push them in a way that is moving them toward freedom, democracy, and openness, and away from that. But at this, I'm not advocating that we get in the middle of their affairs. But if we can encourage them with incentives to move away from these authoritarian, religious dictatorships, I think that would bode well for the future of the Middle East.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, for your time today. And more importantly, thank you for your leadership on these important issues, for standing up for Israel, for Western civilization, for U.S. interests, and standing against Iran, its nuclear ambitions, its disinformation and propaganda. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate everything that you do. Look forward to cooperating with your office more in the future on these critical issues. So thank you again, and thanks to everyone who tuned in. Have a good afternoon.
All right. Thank you so much.